The key point about this manifesto is it's a manifesto addressed to parliamentarians, trying to encourage them to support these things. The first is to support the target, the UN target to halve road deaths and injuries and Sustainable Development Goals. The second one, which is particularly important, is all about the role that parliamentarians can play. And there are some interesting initiatives that we think could benefit her in parliamentary and legislative bodies around the world. One of which, the sign is there, is the role of pacts. All party groups in a number of parliaments have been fantastic instruments for generating political leadership in support of road safety. And we very much hope that other parliaments might try and emulate this sort of approach. And they are indeed, this morning in Australia, the Parliamentary Friends of Road Safety Group, who are supporting our manifesto, were participating in a big event in front of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, which has been illuminated yellow for the whole week. And so we very much hope that this will happen. In Tanzania, our Ambassador Rajabu, who's the signatory there, he has created already in the Assembly in Tanzania a parliamentary group. And of course, just sadly, on Friday there was a horrendous incident there where 36 people died, 32 of them children, in a bus crash, which just sort of makes you realise how urgent it is. So we're very optimistic that we can mobilise parliamentarians. And without straying into awkward political territory, even if you're a one-party state, I still think parliamentarians, legislators, they interact with the communities they represent, and they can have a successful role influencing their governments. We also want to try and encourage the Interparliamentary Union, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, to take up these issues. So that's a particularly important part of the manifesto. The manifesto embraces the safe system approach. It strongly endorses the report last year published by the International Transport Forum on zero road fatalities. Recommendation 4 is to endorse fully the WHO's Safe Lives package, which you've heard about from Etienne. And another important area it highlights is road safety at work. In many countries, something like 25-30% of road deaths are work-related. And of course, that's an area where legislation can make a big impact on the way in which road transport issues are handled by companies and the responsibilities of employees, fleet management, and so on. So that's another area that the manifesto highlights. Good governance in road safety. I think this is a much neglected subject, but basically if you don't have behind your road safety policies very good, reliable, transparent data, for instance, if you have problems with the way that your police enforcement works because of petty corruption and so on, all of these things are going to degrade the quality of effective road safety policies. So we think good governance is an important issue to highlight. It happens to be the theme this year of the major ministerial conference on transport hosted by the International Transport Forum. So that's another key theme. Of course, also road safety needs to be integrated into other transport policies. Perhaps one can argue that road safety has been less successful than the environmental agenda in terms of sustainable transport. We can do a lot more to integrate our discussions around those areas, particularly when you're talking, for instance, about speed management. There's a very close correlation between environmental performance, air quality, and management of speed. Then the role of the multilateral development banks, particularly the World Bank. Last year, the World Bank adopted a very important safeguards policy. This is an overarching statement which is actually legally binding on the bank. It's called their Social Environmental Framework, and it will, for the first time, include a strong section on road safety and affect all of their loan activities over the period going forward when the safeguard policy is implemented, which starts in 2018. So that's another important leverage point. And parliamentarians can have a big influence on the development banks, not least because some of their funding gets approved by legislators. So, and then last, but not quite last, sorry, is funding. George mentioned the big issue around funding for road safety. It's still a very seriously underfunded sector, and there is now this proposal for a road safety fund. So we think it would be extremely good if parliamentarians put their political weight behind the case for a substantial investment in a UN trust fund. And then finally, there's the issue of the road safety target for 2030. And I think I'm allowed to say this because I used to work for John Smith. You don't have to be as optimistic as Jeremy Corbyn to realise that the numbers on the road safety target are not looking terribly good for 2020. We will be very fortunate if we achieve that target. And it worries me, actually, that we may end up at the end of the UN Decade of Action with a sense that, well, the target for 2020 is finished, the decade's over, what are we going to do? We actually need to set ourselves a new goal for 2030. There will be an official process by which the UN assesses its targets in the Sustainable Development Goals, and we need to be getting in there to influence that process and to set a new target. And of course, a target is not the end destination. We all want 0 fatalities, but targets have been very effective in galvanizing action and forcing governments to act. So it'll be the first of any group that has suggested a target for 2030, and I hope, coming from parliamentarians, it will carry some weight in the future discussions. Now, the final point on the slide is that this is really the beginning of a wider campaign. What we're hoping to achieve is to get at least 1,000 parliamentarians around the world to sign up to this manifesto ahead of April next year, is when will be another debate in the UN General Assembly. And there'll be a big opportunity to influence all of these discussions through that debate. And we think it would be extremely good if a delegation of MPs, led hopefully by our distinguished panel here, could come to New York and meet with the UN Secretary General and present the manifesto, saying that there is the support of something like 1,000 parliamentarians. That would be a great way to push these issues forward. So that's what we are really planning, and we will need a lot of help with that in this country as elsewhere. We will need to be engaging with parliamentarians to persuade them to do that. And just before I finish, I would like to say I've worked very closely with parliamentarians, but I had a role also with the European Parliament, with a Member of Parliament, Alan Donnelly, 20 years ago, just a little under 20 years ago, on crash test standards, where Alan Donnelly managed to table 64 amendments to European directives on crash test standards, which completely upended. Actually, Jean Breen was involved with others. There was a coalition of us working. And what it demonstrated to me was the extraordinary power, which George already talked about in his role in Parliament. What Alan managed to do was completely rewrite legislation, introduce much tougher crash test standards. It set the framework from which Euro NCAP grew and so on. And now when you look at it, all this time later, we've got half the occupant fatalities that we used to have. Incredible success across Europe and the UK. And that came from committed and interested parliamentarians with some support from people behind the scenes. And so finally, I would like to thank all of the parliamentary colleagues for the help. I'd also like to acknowledge the chairman of the Towards Zero Foundation, Max Mosley, whose support for this initiative has been absolutely enormous. It is, like a lot of things in road safety, not very well funded, and without his support and his commitment, we wouldn't be doing this at all. So thanks to everybody, and we will be coming back for your help in the next few months and the rest of the period till April. So thanks very much.